Margaret Collins, at 69 years old, had spent nearly her entire adult life in the same home, a large, welcoming house nestled in the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon. It was the house she and her late husband Robert had built together over 4 decades. Every corner of the home whispered stories of their life. The oak tree in the backyard that Robert planted on their first anniversary, the faded floral curtains Margaret had sewn herself, and the sturdy kitchen table where countless family dinners had taken place. Before retiring, Margaret had been a devoted pharmacist at a private clinic. Her days once followed a steady rhythm of helping others, patients arriving with their ailments, co-workers exchanging small talk and worries, neighbors stopping by for a quick hello. Her identity was deeply woven into this community and family network. But everything changed 6 years ago when Robert passed away. His death, quiet and peaceful, left a profound silence echoing throughout the house, a silence that stretched and grew with each passing day. Despite the loneliness, Margaret chose to stay in the home filled with memories, clinging to the tangible threads of the life she had spent so many years building. Margaret's son, Ethan, was now in his early 40s, a hardworking man juggling the demands of a young family and his career. When Ethan and his wife, Isabel, brought their twin toddlers home to live with her, Margaret's heart swelled with a joy she hadn't felt in many years. The prospect of laughter filling the halls again, the bustling footsteps of children, and the warm chaos of family life, it was a light breaking through the long winter of her solitude. Margaret did not hesitate. She immediately offered the spacious upstairs rooms to Ethan, Isabel, and the twins. She transformed the den into a lively playroom, clearing out old boxes and creating space where toys and children's books could thrive. The house that had once felt cavernous and silent suddenly burst back to life. She found herself cooking dinner after dinner, picking up scattered toys from the floor, and walking the twins to preschool on mornings when Isabel had interviews or work commitments. Though her own bedroom was now the smallest on the first floor, Margaret never once complained. "The stairs are harder on me these days," she told them with a gentle smile, and it was true. Her knees had grown creaky over time, but the joy of living under one roof with her family outweighed any physical discomfort. The days were filled with the delightful noise of children's laughter and the sweet chaos of a busy household. Holidays became magical again. Margaret hung stockings for everyone, roasted turkeys that filled the house with comforting aromas, and stayed up late wrapping presents with the twins giggling beside her. Each evening on the porch swing, she found herself smiling quietly, listening to the creak of the chain as the wind stirred the leaves around her. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged again, like a vital part of something larger than herself. Margaret cherished the simple moments, the twins' sticky fingers clutching her hand as they learned to walk, Ethan bringing her a cup of tea after a long day, Isabel's soft laughter blending with the children's chatter. These memories became the balm that soothed the aching loneliness left by Robert's absence. But even in these early, joyful days, there were glimpses of changes ahead, small moments that would soon grow into something far more complex. The house was alive once again, but the rhythms of family life, like a delicate dance, were shifting in ways Margaret couldn't yet understand. Yet for now, she held on to the light and warmth, clinging to the hope that this new chapter was just the beginning of a fresh, happy life. As the months passed, the vibrant energy that once filled Margaret's home began to shift subtly. The noise and laughter that had once embraced every corner grew quieter, replaced by an increasingly invisible but unmistakable distance. Isabel, always meticulous in her planning, started changing the atmosphere of the house in small but unmistakable ways. One afternoon, Margaret noticed that her beloved, well-worn garden chairs, those she had painstakingly restored over the years, had vanished, replaced by sleek, minimalist metal furniture that looked cold and alien in the warm, sunlit backyard. Her old ceramic mugs, each carrying its own story, disappeared from the kitchen shelves, replaced by pristine white cups, more suited to a trendy cafe than a family home. The carefully handmade floral curtains Margaret had sewn, which softened the sunlight and lent the rooms a sense of history, were taken down without any explanation. She found herself staring at bare windows, struggling to reconcile the sterile new look with the memories embedded in every stitch she had crafted decades ago. These changes were no accident, they were deliberate. Isabel had begun calling the house our place in casual conversation, and even showed it off to coworkers as if it were solely hers and Ethan's territory. The Wi-Fi network name was changed from Colin's family to Isabel's nest, a move accompanied by a self-satisfied smile that cut deeper into Margaret's heart than any harsh words could. Margaret tried to laugh along when Isabel joked about this family inside joke, but inside, a quiet storm was brewing. She noticed how Isabel flinched whenever she offered parenting advice, and how Ethan, who used to ask about her day, stopped doing so. The warm, caring son who once brought her tea and sat with her on the porch seemed to be disappearing, replaced by a stranger who only appeared when the kids needed feeding or diaper changes. The twins, once inseparable from their grandmother, had grown distant. Their eyes glued to bright screens no longer lifted with excitement when Margaret entered their room. They played behind closed doors, lost in virtual worlds that seemed to drown out her presence. Margaret didn't blame the children. She understood that young souls simply follow the energy around them. And the energy in the house was shifting away from her. Increasingly, Margaret found herself quietly retreating to the edges of family life. She began eating in her room, gently closing the door behind her, not out of anger, but from an instinct not to disturb a space that no longer felt like hers. She moved carefully through the house, avoiding the hallway when Isabel came down, instead waiting until the rooms were empty before making herself a cup of tea. The garden, once a lush refuge filled with memories, became another battleground. Isabel hired landscapers to remove the overgrown shrubs that Margaret and Robert had planted together in their early years at the house. The new landscaping was neat but sterile, a precise arrangement lacking the soul and wild beauty that once attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. Margaret sat in the sunroom, listening to the hum of hedge trimmers cutting through what felt like the roots of her past. Conversations began to include gentle suggestions wrapped in kindness, but heavy with intent. Flyers for senior activities mysteriously appeared on her bedside table. Isabel left brochures about independent senior living on the kitchen counter without comment. Small but clear signals that Margaret was expected to move on. The subtle message was unmistakable. The family was building a life that no longer included her. Family photos on the mantel shifted. Images of Ethan and Isabel, radiant and modern, took center stage. Margaret's wedding photo was quietly moved to a lower shelf. Her handmade quilt, once proudly draped over the living room sofa, was replaced by a machine-stitched throw in muted tones. The piano that once filled the house with music now sat silent, its keys hidden beneath a display of candles. Margaret began to feel invisible in her own home. She silently apologized for existing, too loud when she coughed, too slow in the shower, too forgetful when picking up groceries. She measured her footsteps, trying to become smaller, quieter, less noticeable. But invisibility was not peace, it was suffocation. It wrapped around her like fog, blurring the edges of who she was until she feared she might vanish completely. The day this realization struck hardest was a Saturday, when Isabel hosted a small gathering for coworkers. Margaret had helped clean, baked pies, and set the table, expecting to share the joy with family and friends. Instead, she stood by the kitchen door as Isabel introduced the house as ours to the guests, never once mentioning Margaret. Laughter and warmth floated from the living room like a world to which she did not belong. No one invited her to sit. She was a ghost, a shadow at they. The turning point arrived quietly, but unmistakably, like the slow cracking of ice beneath a winter lake. Margaret could sense the change in the air, but nothing prepared her for the morning when Ethan and Isabel sat her down at the dining table with an expression she knew all too well, the kind of gentle face people wear when about to deliver bad news wrapped in kindness. Isabel began with carefully chosen words, praising Margaret's decades of care and sacrifice for the family. She spoke softly of gratitude, about how wonderful it was to have 3 generations under one roof, and how much the family appreciated everything Margaret had done. But then, the tone shifted subtly, like turning to an unwelcome chapter in a story. They spoke of change and new opportunities, about how Margaret deserved comfort and rest in her golden years. The word independence was repeated like a gentle mantra, painting a picture of a beautiful, modern senior apartment, convenient, with shuttle buses to the library and social activities for people her age. Margaret listened with a calm face, but a storm of emotions in her heart. They described a place where she would no longer be a guest in her own home, but a valued member of a vibrant community. Yet the unspoken message behind their words was clear. It was time for her to move on. Their vision for the house no longer included her presence. Though Isabel's voice was soft, Margaret felt the weight of the unspoken truth. She was being asked to leave the home she had lived in for nearly 70 years. The place where every creak of the floorboards held a memory, every wall echoed with her husband's laughter, every corner marked milestones of her son's childhood. Margaret said little, only nodded and asked to think about it. She didn't want to start a battle she knew she could not win, but inside she was already plotting a course no one expected. This was not the end of her story. It was the moment she decided to write a new chapter on her own terms. In the days that followed, Margaret walked through the house as if it were a museum, her fingers tracing familiar surfaces. The stairs groaned on the third step, just as they always had. The corner of the living room bore a faint stain from years of holiday movie marathons with Robert asleep on the couch. The clock that once hung in the hallway was now replaced by abstract art Isabel had picked out online. She wasn't nostalgic. She was mapping a battlefield, deciding what to take, what to leave behind, and what to bury so no one else could claim it. She visited a lawyer's office in downtown Portland, an unassuming red brick building filled with leather-bound books and the scent of old paper. The lawyer listened carefully, his expression steady and professional as Margaret signed papers, asked questions, and laid the groundwork for a plan. She arranged for the house to be sold, not to just anyone, but to a family she trusted. Grace, a widow living 3 houses down, and her nephew Dean, a quiet real estate agent in his 30s who owed Margaret a favor after she once helped him pay for medicine when his insurance lapsed. Dean had a plan for a discreet sale without open houses or public listings, just a clean transfer of ownership to protect the home's legacy. Ethan and Isabel remained unaware. They talked excitedly about paint swatches, moving dates, and apartment layouts, while Margaret smiled and asked questions, letting them believe she was cooperating. Their eagerness to erase her presence blinded them to the quiet power Margaret was wielding beneath their noses. The day she signed the final papers, Margaret walked through each room one last time. She whispered Robert's name in every corner, folded her sweaters, packed her books, and left behind the china set and casserole dishes no one ever used. She made her bed with crisp, perfect corners, and left the window cracked open just as she had done every morning for 40 years. When she handed the keys to Dean, she didn't feel sadness. Instead, clarity settled over her like a warm blanket. The woman she had been, the wife, the mother, the keeper of this house, was no longer needed here. But the house itself would live on, cared for by those who understood what it meant to call a place home, not just a showroom. Weeks later, the official documents were delivered to Ethan and Isabel by certified mail. The notice was clear and firm. The house had been sold, and they were now considered unlawful residents, required to vacate within 5 business days or face legal eviction. Margaret imagined their confusion, the panic rippling through their conversations, the silence at the dinner table, frantic phone calls, desperate search for answers. They had been blind to the quiet strength she had cultivated all these years. She didn't answer their calls or emails. Instead, she sat quietly in her new apartment, watching light filter through lace curtains she had hung herself. Outside, the W. After the sale was completed and the legal papers transferred, Margaret Collins stepped out of the shadows of her old life and into a new chapter marked by calm and clarity. She moved into a modest yet cozy second-floor apartment not far from downtown Portland. It was a place filled with soft morning light streaming through east-facing windows and the gentle hum of city life outside her walls. The apartment was small, but it was hers, free from clutter, noise, and the invisible chains that had bound her for years. Margaret carefully arranged her belongings, 2 suitcases filled with clothes, a few treasured photo albums, her late husband Robert's watch, and recipe cards penned in her mother's delicate handwriting. She left behind the furniture and possessions that tied her to the past. The memories she carried in her heart were enough. For the first time in a long while, Margaret slept deeply, no longer holding her breath or battling the cold silence. She found joy in simple pleasures, cooking for herself, taking slow walks through nearby parks, visiting the library to borrow books she had long wanted to read. The silence that filled the apartment was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful and hers to command. Meanwhile, back at the old house on the corner, life went on without her. The new owners, Grace's niece and her husband, moved in with their children, eager to create a home filled with laughter and warmth. They painted the walls a sunny yellow, tended the garden beds where Margaret once grew vegetables, and kept the porch swing gently swaying in the breeze. Margaret occasionally passed by the house while running errands. She never lingered but saw that the home had been transformed, not erased, but built upon. The presence of a new family breathing life into the rooms brought a quiet satisfaction to her heart. It was no longer her home, but it was a home again. Her relationship with Ethan and Isabel changed with distance. Calls came less frequently, then more sporadically, tinged with apology and uncertainty. Ethan's voice, once a source of comfort, now held a hesitant tone as he tried to bridge the gap that years of silence had created. One afternoon, Ethan visited Margaret's apartment. The man standing before her was not the son she once knew, but someone weathered and searching, carrying the weight of guilt and regret. They sat together at her small kitchen table, the space between them wider than it should have been, filled with unspoken questions and raw emotion. Ethan asked why. He sought to understand what he had done wrong, why the family had fractured so deeply. Margaret responded not with anger or blame, but with honesty, sharing how it felt to be slowly erased, reduced to a background figure in her own home. She explained that sometimes absence doesn't mean someone left. It means they were pushed away until they vanished. For the first time, Ethan saw Margaret not as a fixture or a burden, but as a person with a voice, a history, and a right to be seen. He asked if there was any way to fix what had been broken. Margaret gently told him that some things cannot be fixed, only learned from. That moment was more painful than any confrontation. It was a boundary drawn not in anger, but in self-preservation. When Ethan left, there were no tears or dramatic goodbyes, just the sound of a door closing behind him, and a silence that this time felt earned and peaceful. In the weeks and months that followed, Margaret found a rhythm she hadn't realized she had lost. Her mornings were slow and gentle. She brewed tea, sat by the window watching light dance through the trees, and read books without distraction. She cooked what she loved, humming along to music filling the room. She reclaimed her space, rearranging furniture not out of necessity, but as an act of ownership. A new soft lamp glowed like autumn sunshine beside her favorite chair. The apartment reflected her tastes and needs for the first time in decades. No one adjusted the TV volume or hushed her voice. Here, she existed fully, quietly, completely. Margaret began writing again, not grand novels, but simple reflections on the sound of rain, the scent of rosemary in the park, the kindness of strangers holding doors. These pages were not for anyone else, but for herself, a testament to a life reclaimed. Occasionally, the phone would buzz with Ethan's name on the screen. She didn't rush to answer. Sometimes she let it ring until it faded. The calls came without demand, without expectation, just a gentle knock on the door she had closed long ago. And each time, Margaret felt a quiet power in knowing she could choose when or whether to open it. Her life had transformed, not through revenge or bitterness, but through peace and self-respect. She was no longer a shadow in her own story. She was its author, living on her own terms, rich with enough love, enough space, enough dignity. Many months had passed since Margaret Collins left the house she had called home for nearly 70 years. Her new life in the cozy Portland apartment brought her a peace she had never known was possible. A life shaped on her own terms, where she could breathe, speak, and simply be. Yet even in this newfound freedom, the threads of the past gently tugged at her heart. Her phone still lit up occasionally with Ethan's name, calls filled with apologies, hesitation, and quiet hope for reconnection. But Margaret no longer felt desperate to answer. Instead, she held space for healing in her own time, embracing the power to choose when or if to let the past back in. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan unexpectedly appeared at her door. His face bore the weariness of regret and the awkwardness of a man unsure how to cross a widening gulf. Margaret invited him inside, not because she wished to reopen old wounds, but because she recognized that closure often begins with presence. They sat together, no longer mother and son caught in blame, but two souls seeking understanding. Ethan confessed how much he had taken for granted: the late-night talks, the gentle guidance, the simple warmth of a mother's love. He admitted how blind he had been to the slow erasure of the woman who had given him everything. Margaret listened, her heart heavy yet open. She shared not only her pain but her journey, how she found herself not by clinging to what was lost, but by embracing what she could still build: her own identity, her own joy, and her own peace. Rather than demand forgiveness or reconciliation, Margaret spoke of boundaries and respect. She explained that love doesn't always mean living under the same roof. Sometimes it means letting go so both can grow. Coming back, she told Ethan, is not about geography. It's about being seen, respected, and invited in, not tolerated or managed. Ethan nodded, tears welling in his eyes. It was a beginning, a fragile but hopeful one. In the weeks that followed, Margaret's life blossomed quietly. She joined a local book club where she found kindred spirits who celebrated her wisdom and stories. She volunteered at the community garden, planting new life alongside neighbors who welcomed her warmly. She attended music nights, sometimes humming along to familiar songs, sometimes simply soaking in the shared joy. The apartment became a sanctuary where Margaret's spirit could stretch wide. She painted a small canvas with autumn leaves and hung it above her reading chair, a symbol of transformation. She hosted afternoon teas for friends new and old, filling the rooms with laughter and warmth once more. One day, a handwritten letter arrived, a crooked, heartfelt note from one of the children now living in her old house. It thanked her for the garden and the climbing tree, for the quiet magic woven into the place. Margaret gently placed the letter beside a faded photo of Robert and herself, a quiet reminder that life is a tapestry of endings and beginnings. Margaret never sought revenge or bitterness. Instead, she reclaimed her dignity and joy through patience, self-love, and the courage to rewrite her story. She had learned that sometimes survival means retreat, and freedom begins with gently closing a door, without ceremony or farewell. As the sun set over Portland, Margaret sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sky turn violet. She felt whole, enough. She was enough. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. After settling into her new apartment, Margaret found herself eager to build a life filled with purpose and connection. One of her first steps was joining a local senior centers club, a vibrant gathering of people her age, each with stories to tell and a shared desire to stay active and engaged. The club offered exercise classes, book discussions, and social events that quickly became a welcome routine for Margaret. She loved the laughter, the camaraderie, and the sense of belonging that blossomed with every meeting. But it was through a community outreach program that Margaret's life took an unexpected and profound turn. The program focused on supporting children who had suffered abuse and trauma, offering them counseling, safe spaces, and mentorship. Margaret volunteered eagerly, her compassionate heart drawn to the children's courage and resilience. The work was demanding, often heartbreaking, but it filled a deep longing in her to make a difference beyond her own small world. It was there that she met James, tall, quiet, and with a warmth in his eyes that spoke of a life shaped by both hardship and hope. James was a retired police officer who had faced his own sorrows. His wife and 9-year-old grandson had tragically died in a car accident several years earlier. Despite his losses, James had channeled his pain into protecting and advocating for others, making him a natural ally in the community, work they both loved. Over weeks and months, Margaret and James found themselves working side by side more often. Their shared experiences of loss and survival created an unspoken bond that grew stronger with every conversation, every moment of mutual support. Both were keen observers of life, wise from their years as a former doctor and former officer, and they recognized in each other a kindred spirit. Their friendship blossomed into something deeper, a partnership rooted in empathy, respect, and a shared mission to protect the vulnerable. Together, they dreamed of creating a space where the powerless could find strength and safety. Inspired by their vision, they founded a club dedicated to defending those who were often overlooked, victims of abuse, the elderly living in isolation, and anyone at risk in their community. The club quickly gained traction, attracting volunteers and support from local organizations. Margaret and James led workshops on self-defense, legal rights, and emotional resilience. They worked tirelessly to raise awareness and provide resources, becoming pillars of hope for many. For Margaret, this new chapter brought not only purpose but also companionship and love, things she had thought might be lost forever. With James by her side, she felt a renewed sense of belonging and a future rich with meaning. Together, they showed that even after loss and hardship, life could be rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before. As the months passed, Margaret and James's shared vision grew into a powerful force within their community. The club they founded, Protectors of the Vulnerable, had blossomed from a humble idea into a thriving network of advocates, volunteers, and survivors, all committed to creating safer spaces for those who needed it most. Margaret found herself energized by the work in ways she hadn't expected. Each workshop, each outreach event, each story of healing was a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the impact one person can make. Together with James, she stood before crowds, spoke passionately about the importance of protecting the vulnerable, and shared their personal journeys, not to evoke pity, but to inspire strength and hope. Their partnership deepened beyond their shared mission. They became pillars of support for each other, offering comfort in moments of doubt and celebration in every small victory. James's quiet strength balanced Margaret's compassionate resolve, and Margaret's warmth softened James's guarded heart. Together, they created a sanctuary where both could heal and thrive. One evening, after a successful fundraiser that brought in enough donations to expand their programs, James took Margaret's hand as they sat quietly in her apartment. The city lights flickered outside the window, casting a soft glow over the room. "I never imagined finding this kind of peace again," he said, his voice steady but tender. "With you, it feels like home." Margaret smiled, feeling the truth in his words. "Me too," she whispered. "After all we've lost, to find each other and a new purpose, it's more than I ever hoped for." Their story became a beacon for others, a testament to the power of resilience, love, and community. Margaret and James showed that even after the darkest seasons, new beginnings are possible, full of connection, hope, and meaning. In the years that followed, the Protectors of the Vulnerable continued to grow, touching countless lives and fostering a community where no one had to face hardship alone. Margaret's days were filled with purpose, her heart with joy, and her life with the fulfillment of knowing she had rewritten her story on her own terms. And as the sun set each evening over Portland, Margaret sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sky turn shades of violet